We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world.
The dollar, the lone surviving superpower of the U.S., is losing its power. Today, the U.S. dollar represents about 60% of all the currency in the entire world. But that trend is also changing.
The dollar looks like they're dumping it.
The world's largest oil producer, Saudi Arabia, is reportedly asking to join BRICS.
As more and more developing nations, including some of the world's largest economies, decide to ditch the dollar in their bilateral trade, voices of concern and even despair are being heard in the US over the looming end of America's global financial dominance.
Hello, my name is Wolf, and I hope everything is okay with you. Come for the finance, but stay for what's being dubbed the end of the US dollar, as countries such as Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa join together to develop their own alternative to the global reserve currency, which was, and still technically is, the US dollar. People are referring to this as the de-dollarization of the world, and it is likely one of, if not the most significant financial events taking place in the world now, and I'd want to explain how it will influence us. History of the world reserve currency. Let us first define international reserve currencies and what it means to be one, because the US dollar has not always been the world reserve currency. Before the United States dominated the world reserve currency position, there were others that eventually ended, such as the Netherlands, which held the reserve status from 1640 to 1720, France, which held the reserve status from 1720 to 1815, and Great Britain, which held the reserve status from 1815 to 1920. The advent of the Bretton Woods Agreement, the US dollar quickly became the world reserve currency. What exactly is a global reserve currency, and why does the world require one? A world reserve currency is a currency that is kept in considerable amounts by central banks and governments around the world as a worldwide standard for international trade and finance. The global reserve currency is essential to the global economy because it allows international trade, investment, and financial activities. The US dollar is the most visible example of a world reserve currency, having been the main reserve currency since the end of World War II. The use of the US dollar as a reserve currency enables countries to conduct international trade and finance more efficiently by providing a common medium of exchange that is easily transferred across borders. It also provides a measure of financial stability because countries can keep their reserves in a stable currency that is less susceptible to fluctuation and inflation. Why does the world require a reserve currency? A reserve currency is required by the world because it facilitates global economic activity and provides a level of financial stability and predictability. International trade and finance would be more difficult and costly without a single reserve currency, and countries would be more subject to economic insecurity and currency swings. The story of how the US dollar became the world reserve currency. The US dollar became the world's reserve currency following the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, which established a new international monetary system in the aftermath of World War II. Under the Bretton Woods system, the US dollar was fixed to gold at a rate of $35 per ounce, and other currencies were fixed to the US dollar. The United States was the world's greatest economy at the time, and it owned the majority of the world's gold reserves. This gave the United States tremendous control over the global financial system, allowing the US dollar to become the dominant currency in worldwide trade and investment. Aside from economic dominance, the US government built institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank, which increased the US dollar's position within the global financial system. The US dollar has grown in importance as a reserve currency over time, with central banks and governments around the world keeping considerable amounts of US dollars as a store of value and a method of conducting international transactions. The petrodollar. Back in time, US got hit by a very severe inflation and ran out of money, so the only thing that dollars would be able to redeem is just more debt. And by 1971, the US had been using the dollar's dominance for decades to get themselves favorable foreign policy. So the question is, when the US ran out of gold, why didn't the rest of the world go back to using their own currency? And the answer is because they couldn't, because of petrodollar. In 1945, President Franklin Roosevelt set up a secret wartime meeting that would change the course of US history. Very few records were kept from that meeting, but Roosevelt promised the King of Saudi Arabia protection in exchange for the US to have the exclusive right to develop oil from Saudi Arabia. Meaning if another country wanted to buy oil because they need to power their country, which is something they did need and still need to do, they also need US dollars. That's the birth of the petrodollar, and that's also why every single US president since that meeting has cozied up to Saudi Arabia to maintain those positive relationships.
Our house is your house.
There's an Arab saying, the sands are blowing. And I submit to you, King Fahd, that if the sands of time give us any hint of the future, it is that in the days ahead, the friendship between the Saudi Arabian and American people will be a strong and vital force in the world.
Powerhouse and the exclusive right to buy oil have given the United States global dominance over the last century, and the US has sometimes used that dominance over other countries to cut them off from their life force, which is energy. But when that happens, some countries will rebel, particularly those that can produce their own energy. That's why those alliances are breaking up and new ones are being formed to challenge the US dollar's dominance. What are BRIC countries, and what do they wish to accomplish? BRICS is an acronym that stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The BRICS countries are distinguished by their enormous populations, rapid economic growth, and growing political and economic popularity on the world stage. The BRICS countries share the goal of promoting economic development, trade, and investment inside their respective countries and among themselves, as well as increasing their influence in global economic governance. They have set up institutions such as the New Development Bank and the Contingent Reserve Arrangement to provide alternative finance for infrastructure projects and other development initiatives. BRICS countries also seek to promote greater cooperation and integration among themselves through initiatives such as the BRICS Business Council and the BRICS Trade Fair. They have also discussed the possibility of establishing a common currency or a new reserve currency to reduce their dependence on the US dollar. Overall, the BRICS countries reflect a substantial change in the economic power balance away from traditional Western powers, and their efforts to promote deeper cooperation and integration among themselves are expected to have significant implications for the global economy's future. The serious threat for the US dollar became BRICS. The name BRICS originated as a relatively optimistic concept to designate the world's fastest-growing economies at the time. However, the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are already positioning themselves as a viable alternative to established international financial and political institutions. Since the start of the Russian war in Ukraine, the BRICS countries have only distanced themselves further from the so-called West. Neither India, Brazil, South Africa, nor China are taking part in sanctions against Russia. This has become increasingly clear with the near-historic levels of trade between India and Russia or Brazil's dependence on Russian fertilizer. Diplomatically, the war in Ukraine appears to have drawn a stark dividing line between an Eastern-backed Russia and the West, University of Sheffield political scientist Matthew Bishop wrote for the Economics Observatory late last year. As a result, some European and US policymakers are concerned that the BRICS will become more of a political club, defined by their authoritarian nationalism, than an economic club of rising powers seeking to influence global growth and development. Challenging the World Bank model. The BRICS nations established the New Development Bank in 2014 as an alternative to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, with a seed capital of $50 billion, about 46 billion euros. In addition, they established a liquidity mechanism known as the Emergency Reserve Arrangement to assist members who were having difficulty making payments. These proposals were appealing not only to the BRICS nations but also to many other developing and rising economies that had suffered via the IMF's structural adjustment programs and austerity measures. This is why numerous countries have expressed an interest in joining the BRICS organization. New countries showing interest in joining BRICS. According to South African Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor, global interest in the BRICS organization is huge. She informed television journalists in early March that she had 12 letters from interested countries on her desk. Saudi Arabia is one, she pointed out. United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Algeria, and Argentina, as well as Mexico and Nigeria, are among the countries mentioned. End of PetroDollar. After joining BRICS, Saudi is one of the most serious dangers. If Saudi Arabia joins BRICS, it will be the end of the petrodollar, and if this occurs, as Saudi Arabia has already stated that he is open to selling his fuel in other currencies, then we can say it will be the end of the US dollar as a reserve currency or the flashpoint for the Third World War.
It's also possible to have more than one large reserve currency. There have been times when that was the case.
Why is a new reserve currency required? However, the US dollar's dominance as an international reserve currency has recently been a source of concern as some countries strive to minimize their reliance on the dollar and encourage more financial autonomy. Some have proposed creating a new global reserve currency that is more diverse and representative of the global economy. As we all know, the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency since the last century, accounting for roughly 60% of the total value of all foreign exchange currencies, but that trend is changing. Because the ongoing battle against Russia and Ukraine made it plain to the world why they don't have to rely entirely on dollars, since the US restricts the Russian reserve currency and threatens to use it as financial help for Ukraine, which is almost $630 billion, and this leads Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa to make their own common currency to do trade in rather than the dollar. However, the transition to a new reserve currency would be complex and challenging, and it remains to be seen whether such a transition will occur in the near future. That's it for today. Hopefully you will learn something new from this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe our channel.